So now, drum roll, Punya Upadhyaya is going to talk to us about relationships as impetus for service or seva. Punya is a global expert in organizational leadership and culture, having worked with the top 10 companies in the Fortune 500, Native American nations, South African chicken farmers, and other fun people over at the ashram. He's lived in Taos since 1995, in love with his beautiful wife, Pam, who's here. He loves the land and his guru and enjoyed connecting the different worlds that we all celebrate. He currently serves at the Neem Karoli Baba ashram, which has food today. If we have it here, you can eat here and then go over there. You can get double fed today. Thank you, Punya, for being here.
Good morning and thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation and this space. I had thoughts on what we should talk about or what we should discuss today, but after Tuesday, a lot of things just seem very weird, sort of displaced. So I'm trying to honor that, the reality of that relationship that we have with the world, to know that we're not in the same place that we were before. Physically, I'm not in the same place I was then. I was in India that day. And it was very fun. I was with my cousins that I have not seen for a while. And we woke up, because of course, we went to sleep with the elections happening, woke up with the results coming in. And my young nephew was tracking it very loudly. And I was like, look, I can't do this. Can you please put headphones on? But it was difficult. And you could see people looking around asking, what the hell? Which I think is a question many people are asking. And so the point where I come to around this and think about relationships and service is that one of the things that's possibly true here as I listen to people talk, one is that there is a lot of pain for a lot of people, right? There are several people who are feeling very victorious. There's a certain amount of smugness and so on, which victory tends to do. But for those many of people who feel like they were on the side that lost, we're in suffering, and I'm one of them, right? I really believe we lost. And I don't know how to make sense of it yet. I'm still very much in the sense of grieving and a sense of like, how the hell did this happen? Right? And the analyses are just very silly at the moment. The tendency we have for instant analysis it was funny, I was talking to some young guys, young folks in India who are in the media business. And they're doing documentaries in media and so on, and we were discussing social media, and they said, the thing that's really difficult for us is that we always have to have an opinion. Like, you don't get any space to not have an opinion. You don't get any space to think. You don't get any space to reflect. Now, these are people who are in the thick of it, right? They're in their late 20s, early 30s. They're professionals. They're trained in this world, and they're struggling to figure out how to make this work. People like me who, can't figure out which way to hold the phone when trying to take a video, it's a little harder for us. So, but as we were talking, the sense that came out was just this sense that they don't get a chance to rest. And so I like the last song, Kenny. It's like this question that he kept getting was, how do we rest? And I think as those of us who are in pain, those of us who are struggling, there is a question of how do we rest? Because there's a way in which we need to rest in order to be able to serve. And relationships are one of the places in which we find a place to rest. Right? There's a danger here that we scrunch up in our pain, that we withdraw, that we hide. And there is some of that, right? There's some validity to that desire to hide, to sort of curl up and say, or to get grumpy, or, to get into these places. There's a lot of validity to that impulse. And we should indulge those impulses, just like we should indulge impulses for bad movies or ice cream or other things that are not necessarily good for us, quote unquote, in large amounts. But there needs to then be a boundary around that. And the boundaries really get shaped by our relationships. When I started being on the path of spiritual inquiry, I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I had no real idea what I was doing. Right? Like so many people, I had no idea that I was actually doing this work. And what I thought at that time was that I was doing it by myself. Of course, I had people around me, I had insights and so on. I always thought I was doing it by myself. That I was the one doing the work. I was the one having these amazing experiences. I was the one pushing these boundaries. I was the one doing this. And it took me years to realize that there was this whole ecosystem holding. And what I was lucky was that I had very good mentors, very good teachers, my parents among them, teachers in different fields who helped me without having to beat me on the head with the fact that they were holding me, right? So I could be independent and strong and, all these other good things, and I was held. And if you look around, I think that's part of the job that all of us have as people who are elders now, as people who are leading different aspects of our worlds and lives, that we provide that care and that holding. That in a sense, our job in relationships for many of us is not just to be there as part of a relationship, but actually to be holding that space for other people to be able to grow, to grieve, and to hold. And so when you do that, the question comes, well, where do I get my replenishment? Right? Because I'm doing the work. I have to hold the space for other people. There are other people who need the space, and I'm aware enough and thinking enough to do this. How do I do that? How do I hold the space? But then also, how do I get replenishment? And that's where circles like this come in, where people who are doing the work in the world, where people who are caring and showing up and holding space can support each other. I was in Benares, Varanasi in India, and we had amazing adventures with the gods. It was very fun. I did things that I have never done in my life. Some things I didn't even know you could do with the gods, which was, very, very cool. And if you come hang out at the ashram and drink some chai, I'll tell you some stories. But for here, the story was that I also was invited to work with an interfaith group. And we had Muslims and Christians and a couple of Hindus and a lot of atheists. And we were sitting in a room together talking for a few hours. And we were discussing this. And the question that kept coming up for them was they were tired. Our authoritarian government has been in place at the national level for about 14 years. And at the state level, in their state, for about 6 years. So they have a ton of pressure on them, right? There's a lot of active state-led violence and oppression and authoritarianism that they're dealing with on a daily basis. And you could feel it as we sat and talked. You could feel their tiredness. And then as we talked, we kept talking about, the interfaith work we do in Taos. Many of you see Clark and Tanya there, that we do this interfaith work in Taos and how we connect with each other. See Susan there, right? So, but the other part is, how do we talk about what does that mean? How do we connect with each other? What do we do? And one of the basic things that kept coming up as they talked with each other was the idea of how do we care for each other? How do we support each other? How do we check in on each other, right? And I'd say that's something that maybe takes a little bit more work than many of us are always thinking about, especially in a time of stress. But it's a good thing to do, to make a discipline of reaching out and checking in on each other. Because these are difficult times, and this is the start of a difficult time, right? This is not the end. This is sort of like the curtains going up. It's going to be difficult and worse over the next few years. So how do we support each other? How do we build these relationships? And one thing that came to me talking to these people who've been doing this work now for 14, 15 years and were tired, was a lot about small steps, but a lot about small things that you can do for each other and showing up and caring for each other, checking in. And that was one of the things I took away, was how important it is to do. I have friends that, and of course, as soon as I finished the meeting and did my next thing, I had moved on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so I had lost track of some of the things I was planning to do in my act of caring. And so I'm reminding myself and going back and saying, okay, wait a minute, I know that I'm late, but I can still do it. So being late is okay. Being wrong is okay. Kathleen's laughing, she's like, librarians don't like late, right? Kathleen, by the way, is one of the relationships that made such a difference to me in this, in my living in Taos. I came here as a grad student and was shocked to find that there was no library in town that could get me the stuff I needed as a grad student. And Kathleen without my having any formal affiliation, was gracious and opened up UNM's library and got me a ton of resources. My wife is still trying to figure out a way to put all those boxes of papers that you helped me get. And, I was able to complete my dissertation, so thank you very much. And these relationships, this willingness to give, this willingness to be generous is really important.
I think we need a round of applause for the way that Kathleen has served our community. You're amazing, girl.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think we're all in here amazing.
Takes a village, huh?
I'm very lucky because she's my neighbor.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Punya, I love you.
Love you too. And it leads directly to the notion of seva, right? And the reason I put relationships and seva together is because if we try to do seva, if we try to do service without relationships, we tend to be jerks, because then we tend to act on people rather than with them. And that's always our temptation, because I want to move fast. There's so much need. There's so many things to be done. I've got to fix all these things. How do I slow down so I can go do that, right? How do I slow down so that, we can care for each other? It's funny, Jenny was talking about food at the ashram. It's one thing we talked about in different places and met with people from different temples and churches and gurudwaras and other places when I was walking around and with these interfaith groups and other kinds of groups. And we talk about the ashram in Taos, and they'd always be very surprised, one, by the number of people we fed, because, we're a small place. So they were surprised by that. They were always surprised and amused by the fact that we had chai all the time. That's not normal in India. So they were like, really? You guys just get chai all day long? And it was like, yeah, I'm not sure why we started that, but it works. But they were like also just really touched that, and they actually took it for granted in a way that you feed people because they show up, right? And I remember when we were feeding people, it's always interesting for me as we were doing the actual feeding process that people want to rush, right? The ones who are doing the serving, the ones who are trying to do these things, they want to rush. And because they can see the line, right? And some days the line is long, in the summer or the festivals, that line is like, holy wow, where did all these people come from? And so there's this real temptation to rush. And it's so important at that point to remind people to slow down, that this is an offering, right? It's not just a feeding, it's not just dumping food on people's plates. This is actually an offering. This is us receiving a gift as we give this food. And can we slow down enough to receive that gift of giving this food? When some of the hippies who went to India asked Baba and Imkroli Baba, how do I get liberated? How do I get enlightened? Right? And his answer was feed people. So for us, it's very true. It's like it's directly there. Our guru said, when you feed people, you're getting enlightened. So of course you want to rush that. How quickly, chop chop. So, how do we then find the patience to say, oh, I'm going to do this? And that is the relational part. So even in that micro moment as you're serving, you take the time to say thank you, take the time to connect and say, to receive the blessing of giving the food, to give the food in a kind way, to do it. It's a practice. I love it when I get a chance to do that. It varies depending on how busy we are. But it's something very sweet about that. And it's fun to share that with folks. But that sense that we have to ground our service in relationships is so important, so that we can do this with each other, we can do this together to help us all. And that's the way also it nourishes us. Because if I'm only giving in a distant way, then I don't get nourished by the giving. So it goes back to how do we nourish each other, how do we support each other in this process? Because most of us are giving in our lives. And the more we can give in that space of relationship, the more replenished we are by doing that. And it's true in every relationship, no matter how intimate or how distant, that togetherness is what makes the giving together and what makes it work like service. So that's what's going to keep us together and have us go through whatever this next phase is. It's going to be unpleasant, and there's going to be stuff pretty much every day. If you remember the last time this happened, every day we're going to have reasons to be unhappy or disgusted or troubled and so on. And yet, when we care for each other, when we care for each other in a way that we can offer help and service, when we care for each other in a way that we can offer each other tiny kindnesses and just keep taking that next step, we will do great. We will be able to replenish and renew and to build better worlds. And we will have a good tomorrow. We will be able to care for each other, for our friends and our family, and those who are not allowed to be mentioned in so many ways. And we will build a world that we can be gracious about and happy in.
Yes.